She was invisible in her own home, until the night she became dangerous. 3 years of silence, 3 years of being nothing more than a womb with a title. And then, standing in the cold marble hallway outside her husband's chamber, Alara Vance heard the words that shattered everything. The Duchess? She's barely worth the effort. Once she gives me an heir, I'll be done pretending. Her hand moved instinctively to her stomach, where a secret already grew, unknown to the man who'd just dismissed her existence. That was the moment the invisible Duchess stopped surviving and started planning. This is the story of a woman who disappeared from a world that never saw her and returned as someone they could no longer ignore. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city below. I want to see how far this story travels. The clock in the east wing of Stormgrave Manor struck 11, each chime reverberating through stone corridors like a countdown to something irreversible. Alara stood motionless in the doorway of the drawing room, watching her husband, Duke Cassian Vance, lean close to Lady Isolde Harrington. Too close. His hand rested on the carved armrest of Isolde's chair, proprietary, intimate in a way he had never been with Alara. She should have felt something, rage maybe, heartbreak. But there was only a cold, creeping numbness, the kind that came after years of small cuts that never quite healed. "Your Grace," the voice came from behind her, Mrs. Calloway, the head housekeeper, her tone carefully neutral. "Shall I prepare tea for the drawing room?" Alara turned, her expression practiced and serene. "No, the Duke and his guest are not to be disturbed." Mrs. Calloway's eyes flickered with something that might have been pity. She'd been at Stormgrave longer than Alara, long enough to know exactly what kind of marriage this was. "Of course, Your Grace." Alara walked away, her silk slippers soundless on the polished floors. 3 years. 3 years of sleeping in separate chambers, of dinners where Cassian spoke only to inquire about her health or to issue instructions about upcoming social obligations. 3 years of being paraded at balls and galas like a prized mare, valuable only for the bloodline she might produce. She had been 17 when they married. Her family, minor nobility with crumbling estates and mounting debts, had been ecstatic. The Duke of Stormgrave was one of the most powerful men in the kingdom, wealthy beyond measure, connected to the royal family itself. Alara's mother had wept with relief at the betrothal. Nobody had asked Alara what she wanted. She climbed the curved staircase to the second floor, her hand trailing along the cold marble balustrade. The west wing was hers, a gilded cage with Persian rugs and oil paintings and furniture worth more than her family's entire estate. She had her own sitting room, her own bedchamber, her own dressing room. Everything a duchess could want, except a husband who saw her as human. Alara entered her sitting room and closed the door, leaning against it. The fire had burned down to embers, casting the room in shadow. She moved to the window, pulling back the heavy velvet curtain to look out over the manicured gardens. In the distance, she could see the lights of the village, tiny pinpricks of warmth in the darkness. Her hand moved to her stomach again. 6 weeks. Maybe 7. She hadn't been certain at first, had dismissed the nausea as nerves, the exhaustion as the weight of another tedious season. But her monthly courses had stopped, and this morning she'd barely made it to the wash basin before retching up her breakfast. She was carrying Cassian's child, the heir he'd demanded, the only reason he'd married her in the first place. She should tell him. Protocol demanded it. The entire purpose of their arrangement was to produce an heir, to continue the Vance bloodline. This was supposed to be her moment of triumph, the validation of her existence. But the words she'd heard tonight, barely worth the effort, kept echoing. A knock at the door made her drop the curtain. "Your Grace?" It was Anna, her lady's maid. "I've drawn your bath." "Thank you, Anna. I'll be just a moment." She heard the girl's footsteps retreating. Anna was sweet, barely 16, terrified of making mistakes. Alara had been kind to her. It cost nothing to be kind. And Anna had blossomed under the attention, becoming fiercely loyal in that puppyish way of the young. Alara moved to her writing desk and lit the oil lamp. The flame cast dancing shadows across the leather-bound journals stacked neatly in the corner. For 3 years she had written in them faithfully. Observations about the household, about society, about the architecture of her own loneliness. Cassian had never asked to read them. He'd never asked about anything that mattered to her. She pulled out a piece of stationery and uncapped the ink bottle, then paused. What was there to say? "Dear husband, I heard you dismiss my worth tonight while courting your mistress. By the way, I'm carrying your child. Congratulations." She set down the pen. No, not yet. There was a strategy to survival, and Alara had learned it the hard way. You didn't show your hand until you understood the game, and right now she needed to think. The following morning, Cassian was gone before breakfast. He often was. Estate business, parliamentary duties, meetings that required his attention in the capital. Alara ate alone in the breakfast room, forcing down toast and tea while her stomach churned. "Will your grace be receiving callers today?" Mrs. Calloway asked, hovering near the doorway. "No." Alara set down her teacup. "I'm not feeling well. Please send my regrets." "Of course, your grace. Shall I summon Dr. Pemberton?" "That won't be necessary, just some rest." She retreated to her chambers, but sleep was impossible. Her mind raced, turning over possibilities like a gambler counting cards. If she told Cassian about the pregnancy, what would change? He would be pleased, certainly. An heir secured his legacy, strengthened his political position. He might even be kinder to her for a time, solicitous of her health, careful of her comfort, but only as long as she served her purpose. Only as long as the child was safe. And after? Once she'd given birth, once his heir was secured, what would she be then? Expendable. She'd seen it before, in other noble families. The wife relegated to the country estate, while the husband lived freely in the capital. The children raised by nurses and tutors, barely knowing their mother. A life of comfortable irrelevance, decorative and powerless. Or worse, what if there were complications? What if the birth was difficult, or the child was sickly? Would Cassian blame her? Would she become the wife who failed to provide a suitable heir? The thought made her chest tighten. She rose and moved to her wardrobe, running her hands over the gowns hanging there. Silks and satins, each one worth a year's wages for a working family. Beautiful prisons. Her fingers stopped on a simple day dress, dove gray, high-necked, unadorned. She pulled it out and held it up to the light. When had she last worn something that wasn't dictated by social expectation? When had she last made a choice that was entirely her own? A wild thought flickered through her mind. What if I left? She almost laughed at the absurdity. Where would she go? With what money? A duchess didn't simply walk away from her life. There were contracts, obligations, an entire social structure that would collapse at such a breach. Her family would be ruined. Cassian would hunt her down, not out of love, but out of pride. You didn't abandon a duke without consequences. And yet, the thought wouldn't let go. She spent the rest of the day in her sitting room, ostensibly reading, but really just thinking. Anna brought lunch, then dinner. Alara picked at both, her appetite gone. That night, she lay awake in her massive four-poster bed, staring at the canopy above her. The house was silent except for the occasional creak of settling wood and the distant hoot of an owl. Somewhere in the capital, Cassian was probably dining with Isolde, or someone else. It didn't matter. He had his life, full of purpose and power and choices. And she had this elegant emptiness. Her hand moved to her stomach again. Beneath her palm, a tiny life was forming. A child who would inherit all of this, the title, the wealth, the expectations. If it was a boy, he would become a duke, would learn to wield power as Cassian did. If it was a girl, well, she would become what Alara was, a bargaining chip, a womb with a pedigree, unless Alara changed the game. Over the next week, she began to pay attention in ways she never had before. Not to the endless social calendar or the household management. She'd mastered those performances years ago. No, she paid attention to the things that mattered. Money first. Cassian gave her an allowance, generous by any standard, for clothing and personal expenses. Most of it went unused. Alara had never been particularly interested in jewels or extravagant purchases, but she'd also never tracked exactly how much she had, or where it went. She started keeping records. Second, she paid attention to the staff, who was loyal to Cassian, who was simply loyal to the position, and who might be loyal to her if given reason. Mrs. Calloway was the latter, she suspected. The housekeeper had daughters of her own, had seen enough of the world to understand what Alara's life actually was. Third, she paid attention to the rhythms of the household. When Cassian was present, when he was absent. Which rooms were used, which were neglected. The back entrances, the servants' stairs, the parts of Stormgrave that existed beneath the polished surface. She did all of this quietly, invisibly. It was easy. She'd been invisible for years. On the 8th day, Cassian returned from the capital. Alara received word from Mrs. Calloway that he would be dining at home and expected her presence. She dressed carefully, choosing a gown of deep emerald silk that Cassian had once complimented. Not because she wanted his approval, but because she needed him to see her as compliant, predictable. No reason to pay attention. He was already in the dining room when she arrived, reading correspondence while a footman poured wine. He glanced up as she entered, his expression polite but distant. "Alara, you look well." "Thank you, Your Grace." She took her seat at the opposite end of the long table, 20 feet of polished mahogany between them. Always the distance. The first course was served, a delicate soup that Alara forced herself to eat despite her queasy stomach. Cassian made small talk about parliamentary business, a vote on trade regulations, something about tariffs. She murmured appropriate responses, playing her part. Then as the second course arrived, he said, "Lady Isolde sends her regards. She mentioned you were missed at the Ashford ball." Alara's hand tightened on her fork. "I wasn't aware my absence was notable." "You're a duchess. Your presence is always notable." He said it without irony, as if it were simple fact. "We have obligations, Alara. The season is in full swing. People expect to see us together." Together. The word was almost funny. "Of course," she said. "I apologize for my absence. I haven't been feeling well." His eyes sharpened slightly. "Nothing serious, I hope?" This was the moment. She could tell him, could watch his expression shift from mild concern to calculated interest, could set in motion the exact future she'd been dreading. Instead, she said, "Just fatigue. Nothing that rest won't cure." He nodded, satisfied, and returned to his meal. The conversation moved on. Alara smiled politely and made mental notes. He hadn't asked about her health beyond the most cursory inquiry. Hadn't noticed that she'd barely touched her food. Hadn't looked at her, really looked, even once. She was invisible again, and that, she realized, was exactly what she needed. The plan came together slowly, like a puzzle assembled in dim light. Alara had never been a strategic thinker. She'd been raised to be ornamental, agreeable, skilled in music and needlework and the art of pleasant conversation. But desperation had a way of sharpening the mind. First, the money. She had her allowance, which she began hoarding. Every coin that didn't go to absolutely necessary expenses she saved. She also started quietly selling things, small items from her chambers that wouldn't be missed. A porcelain figurine here, a silver hairbrush there. She sent Anna to the village with them, claiming they were gifts for the girl's family. Anna, grateful and trusting, never questioned it. Within 3 weeks, Alara had accumulated a sum that shocked her. Not enough to live like a duchess, but enough to survive. Enough to disappear. Second, the identity. She couldn't simply walk out as the Duchess of Stormgrave. She needed to become someone else. Someone forgettable. She studied the household staff, paying attention to their backgrounds, their families. One of the kitchen maids, a girl named Mara Thorne, had recently left service to marry a fisherman in a coastal village up north. Alara had signed the reference herself, barely remembering the girl. Mara Thorne. Common. Unremarkable. A woman who could disappear into the fabric of ordinary life. Alara began crafting the story in her mind. Mara Thorne, widowed young when her fisherman husband drowned in a storm. Penniless. Looking for work in a new place, far from painful memories. It was simple. Believable. The kind of tragedy that happened every day. Third, the logistics. She couldn't take much. A single bag, clothes that wouldn't draw attention, enough supplies to reach the coast. She would have to travel by public coach, endure the discomfort and indignity of common transport. Everything about her current life would have to be stripped away. The thought was terrifying, and strangely exhilarating. She chose a date, 3 weeks hence, when Cassian would be in the capital for an extended parliamentary session. She would leave at night, when the household was asleep. By the time anyone realized she was gone, she'd be miles away. As the day approached, Alara found herself wavering. Late at night, alone in her chambers, doubts crept in. What if she failed? What if Cassian found her? What if the pregnancy became difficult and she had no access to physicians, no safety net? What if she was making the biggest mistake of her life? But then she would remember, barely worth the effort, and she would think of her child growing inside her, a child who would be born into this world of cold transactions and loveless duty if she stayed, or a child who might be born free if she had the courage to run. The night before her planned departure, Cassian came to her chambers. It was so unexpected that Alara actually gasped when the door opened. He stood in the doorway, still dressed in his evening clothes, a glass of brandy in his hand. Alara, his voice was measured, but there was something underneath it. Uncertainty, maybe. May I come in? She rose from her chair by the fire, her heart hammering. Of course, Your Grace. He entered, closing the door behind him. The room suddenly felt impossibly small. When was the last time they'd been alone together like this? Their wedding night? That awkward, mechanical encounter that had left her feeling more alone than ever? Cassian moved to the fireplace, staring into the flames. I wanted to speak with you before I leave tomorrow. Tomorrow. Her plan depended on tomorrow. Yes? She kept her voice steady. There have been rumors. He swirled the brandy in his glass. Nothing substantial. Whispers, really, about my conduct. Alara said nothing. Lady Isolde and I... He paused. We have a friendship, nothing more. But I'm aware of how it might appear. Was this an apology? An explanation? Alara couldn't tell. His back was to her, his posture rigid. I understand appearances matter, she said carefully. They do. He turned to face her then, and for a moment she saw something in his expression that looked almost human. This marriage, I know it hasn't been what you might have hoped for. Hoped for. As if she'd had hopes. As if anyone had asked. It's been what it needed to be, she said. Yes. He nodded slowly. Exactly that. What it needed to be. He drained his brandy. I'll be in the capital for several weeks. Parliamentary business. I trust you'll manage things here? Of course. He moved toward the door, then paused. You've been a credit to the family, Alara. I don't say that enough. The words should have meant something. Maybe they would have, 3 years ago. Now they were just noise. Thank you, Your Grace. He left, closing the door softly behind him. Alara stood there for a long moment, trembling. She moved to the window, watched as Cassian's figure appeared below, crossing the courtyard to the main house. His shoulders were set, his stride purposeful. He had no idea that tomorrow night his compliant, credit-to-the-family wife would vanish, taking his heir with her. But the next evening, Alara went through her usual routine with meticulous care. Dinner alone in her chambers, time in the library, selecting a book she had no intention of reading, a brief walk in the garden as the sun set. Everything normal, everything expected. Anna helped her prepare for bed, chattering about her sister's upcoming wedding. Alara listened, made appropriate comments, even laughed at Anna's description of the chaotic dress fittings. Will that be all, Your Grace? Anna asked, banking the fire. Yes, thank you, Anna. Sleep well. You too, Your Grace. The door closed. Alara listened to Anna's footsteps fading down the corridor. Then she waited. She'd learned the rhythms of the household so well by now. Mrs. Calloway would retire by 11. The footmen would finish their duties by midnight. The night watchman made his rounds every 2 hours, but he was old and predictable, more interested in his pipe than his duties. At 1:30, Alara rose from bed, still fully dressed beneath her nightgown. She pulled off the gown and smoothed down the simple gray dress underneath, the same one she'd examined weeks ago. She'd had Anna launder it repeatedly, letting the fabric soften and fade until it looked properly worn. Her hair, she braided simply, tucking it under a plain bonnet. No jewelry except her wedding ring, which she removed and left on the dressing table. Next to it, she placed a letter, the only one she'd written. Cassian, I cannot continue this arrangement. Please don't search for me. I release you from any obligation you feel toward me, and I ask that you release me from mine. Alara. It said everything and nothing. Let him think what he wanted, that she'd run off with a lover, that she'd had a breakdown, that she'd simply given up. None of it mattered. She picked up the carpetbag she'd packed and hidden in the back of her wardrobe. It contained 2 changes of clothes, her savings sewn into the lining, basic toiletries, and the falsified reference letter she'd written for Mara Thorne. One last look around the room. 3 years of her life, reduced to a bag and a letter. She didn't feel sad. She felt light. Alara moved to the door, easing it open. The corridor was dark and silent. She slipped out, keeping to the shadows, taking the servants' stairs down to the ground floor. Her heart pounded so hard she was sure someone would hear it, but the house slept on. The kitchen was empty, the fire banked. She moved through it to the scullery, to the back door that the maids used. She'd oiled the hinges herself 3 days ago, during an afternoon when the kitchen staff was occupied elsewhere. It opened soundlessly. Cold night air hit her face. Alara stepped out into the darkness, closing the door behind her. She was outside Stormgrave Manor for the first time in 3 years without an escort, without a carriage, without anyone knowing where she was. The village was 2 miles away. The coaching inn, where she could catch the northbound mail coach, was there. She'd timed it perfectly. The coach left at dawn. She started walking. The road was rough beneath her worn boots, another purchase Anna had made for her, thinking they were for charity. Alara had walked more tonight than she had in months. Her legs ached. Her breath came short. But she kept moving. Behind her, Stormgrave Manor rose against the night sky, all its windows dark. No alarm, no shouts. She was truly doing this. Halfway to the village, she had to stop and rest, leaning against a stone wall. Her hand went to her stomach, barely showing yet, easily hidden under loose clothing. "We're going to be all right," she whispered. "Both of us." The baby, of course, didn't answer, but somehow saying it out loud made it feel possible. She pushed off from the wall and kept walking. But dawn was just breaking when Alara reached the coaching inn. The yard was busy with ostlers preparing horses, drivers checking harnesses, passengers stumbling out with luggage, and sleepy children. She bought her ticket with cash, giving the name Mara Thorne in a voice she barely recognized as her own. The clerk didn't even look up, just took her money and handed over the paper. "North coach leaves in 20 minutes, he said. "Climb aboard when you're ready." 20 minutes. Alara moved to the corner of the yard, watching the controlled chaos around her. These were ordinary people, living ordinary lives. Tradesmen and farmers, servants and traveling salespeople. Nobody looked twice at a plainly dressed woman with a single bag. She was invisible. For 3 years she'd hated being invisible. Now it was saving her life. The driver called for passengers to board. Alara climbed into the coach, squeezing onto a bench between a stout farmer and a tired-looking woman with a sleeping infant. The space was cramped, the air close, nothing like her private carriage with its velvet cushions and foot warmers. It was perfect. The coach lurched into motion. Through the window, Alara watched the village fall away, then the familiar countryside. She'd traveled this road in the opposite direction 3 years ago, a terrified girl in a wedding dress, heading toward a future she didn't choose. Now she was heading toward nothing. No plan beyond survival. No safety net. No guarantee of anything. But it was hers. The woman next to her shifted, and the baby woke up, letting out a wail. The mother immediately began soothing it, rocking and shushing. "Sorry," she mumbled to the other passengers. "Teething." "How old?" Alara asked, surprising herself. 7 months. The woman looked exhausted but fond. "My third. You'd think I'd be used to this by now." Alara smiled. "I can't imagine." But she could, actually. In a few months, she would be doing exactly this, managing a crying infant, sleep-deprived and alone, figuring it out as she went. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like possibility. The coach rumbled north, away from Stormgrave, away from Cassian, away from everything that had defined Alara Vance, toward whatever came next. She pressed her forehead against the window and let herself breathe. For the first time in 3 years, she felt the weight in her chest ease. She wasn't safe yet. The hard part was still ahead. But right now, in this moment, on this coach full of strangers who didn't know her name or title or worth, she was free. And that was enough to keep going. The journey north took 4 days that felt like 4 years. Mara, she had to remember, Mara Thorne, learned quickly that travel by public coach was less an adventure and more a form of slow torture. The springs were shot, so every rut in the road sent passengers bouncing against each other. The windows leaked cold air. At night, they stopped at coaching inns where she paid for the cheapest accommodations, shared rooms with strangers, straw mattresses that reeked of mildew, thin blankets that did nothing against the chill. She was sick twice, once into a bucket at the side of the road while other passengers looked away politely, once in the cramped washroom of an inn. The nausea was getting worse, not better. By the 3rd day, the woman with the infant, her name was Bess, started giving Alara concerned looks. "You all right, love?" Bess asked as they rattled through a particularly rough stretch of road. "You're looking peaked." "Just not used to traveling," Alara said, which was true enough. "First time on the northern route?" "Yes, I'm starting over. My husband died." The lie came easier each time she told it. She'd practiced it so many times in her head that it almost felt real. Bess's face softened immediately. "Oh, you poor thing. How long?" 3 months. Specific details made lies believable. Fishing accident. "And you're going where?" "Wherever I can find work." Alara kept her voice steady. "I heard the coastal villages up north need help during fishing season." Bess nodded knowingly. "They do, that's true. Hard work, though. You done that kind of labor before?" "Never. Not once in her entire life." "I'm willing to learn," Alara said. The baby started fussing, and Bess shifted her attention away. Alara pressed her forehead against the cold window, watching unfamiliar landscape roll past. Hills giving way to flatter terrain, scattered farms, then increasingly rocky ground as they moved toward the coast. She had no idea what she was doing. The plan, if it could even be called that, was to reach a village far enough from Stormgrave that nobody would recognize her, find work that would pay for a room and food, and somehow survive long enough to have this baby without dying in the process. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was hers. On the fourth day, the coach finally reached Rothaven, a fishing village clinging to the rocky coast like a barnacle. The smell hit her first. Salt and fish and something else, something organic and ancient. The ocean. She'd seen it before, of course, on seaside holidays with her family when she was young, but she'd experienced it from the terrace of a resort hotel, with servants bringing lemonade and parasols. This was different. This was raw. The coach deposited passengers in the village square, really just a wide spot in the dirt road where a few market stalls stood. Alara climbed down with her bag, legs shaking from days of sitting cramped. Bess waved goodbye, heading off with her children toward a waiting husband who swept her into a hug that made Alara's chest ache with something she couldn't name. She stood alone in the square as the coach pulled away, dust swirling in its wake. A few locals glanced at her. Strangers were probably unusual here, but nobody approached. Alara spotted a weathered building with a sign that might have once read "The Anchor Inn," but was now too faded to be certain. It would have to do. Inside, the common room was dark and reeked of old beer. A handful of men sat at rough tables, drinking and talking in low voices. They all looked up when she entered, conversation dying. Alara kept her chin up, moving to the bar where a thick-set woman was wiping down the counter with a rag that looked older than the building. "Help you?" the woman asked. Her tone wasn't friendly, but it wasn't hostile either, just wary. "I need a room," Alara said. "Just for tonight, while I look for work." The woman's eyes traveled over her, taking in the plain dress, the worn bag, the bonnet, calculating. 3 copper a night, meals extra. It was highway robbery, but Alara wasn't in a position to negotiate. She dug into her bag and produced the coins. The woman made them disappear with practiced efficiency. "Top of the stairs, second door. Chamber pot's under the bed. You break it, you buy a new one." "Thank you." The room was barely bigger than a closet, with a narrow bed and a single cracked window overlooking the harbor. But it was private, and it was hers. Alara set down her bag and sank onto the bed, which creaked ominously. She'd made it. She was here. Now she just had to figure out how to survive. The next morning, Alara discovered that finding work in a fishing village, when you had no useful skills and were secretly pregnant, was approximately as difficult as she'd feared. The first place she tried was the fish processing shed down by the docks. A man with a face like weathered leather looked her up and down and laughed. "You ever gutted a fish, girl?" "No, but I can learn. Get 36 experienced women fighting for shifts. Why would I take someone green?" He turned away, dismissing her. She tried the market next. A woman selling vegetables needed help hauling crates, but when Alara attempted to lift one, her arm shook and she nearly dropped it. The woman snorted. "Come back when you've got some muscle on you." By midday, Alara was exhausted, hungry, and starting to panic. Her money wouldn't last long at 3 copper a night plus meals. She needed income, fast. She was sitting on a barrel near the docks, trying to catch her breath, when an older woman approached. She was small and bird-like, with sharp eyes and gray hair pulled back severely. "You the girl staying at the Anchor?" the woman asked without preamble. "Yes." Alara stood, wincing at the stiffness in her legs. "Greta says you're looking for work." Greta must be the innkeeper. News traveled fast in a small village. "I am," Alara said. "Can you clean?" "Yes." Finally something she could honestly claim. She'd supervised cleaning at Stormgrave, Had even done some herself in the early days when she'd been desperately trying to be useful. Can you cook? That was trickier. Alara had never actually cooked a meal in her life, but how hard could it be? Basic things, she said carefully. The woman studied her with those sharp eyes. You running from something? Alara's heart stopped. I'm a widow, she said. Looking to start over. The woman didn't sound convinced, but she also didn't push. I'm Mrs. Caro. I run a boarding house for fishermen. Lost my girl last week. Ran off to marry some fool from the next village over. Need someone to clean rooms, do laundry, help with meals. Room and board plus 4 copper a week. 4 copper a week. It was barely anything, but room and board meant she wouldn't have to pay for the inn. I'll take it, Alara said. Start tomorrow, Dawn. Don't be late. Mrs. Caro turned and walked away. The matter settled. Alara sagged against the barrel, relief flooding through her. It wasn't much, but it was a foothold. A chance. She could do this. She was wrong. The work at Mrs. Caro's boarding house was brutal in ways Alara hadn't imagined. She arrived at dawn the next day to find a 2-story building that housed 8 fishermen in various states of squalor. The rooms stank of sweat and fish and unwashed bodies. The kitchen was a disaster. The laundry alone nearly broke her. Water pumps out back, Mrs. Caro said, showing her a massive pile of soiled linens. Soap's in that bucket. Scrub boards there. I expect these clean by evening. Alara stared at the pile. All of them? All of them. And mind you, use cold water for the bloodstains, or they'll set permanent. Bloodstains. She spent the entire day bent over a washboard, scrubbing until her hands were raw and her back screamed. The water was icy, even though it was spring, and the lye soap made her skin crack and bleed. By afternoon, she was crying silently, tears dripping into the wash water. But she kept going. That night, Mrs. Caro inspected the laundry with a critical eye. Passable, she said finally. Your wringing needs work. These are still too wet, but passable. Alara's room was a tiny attic space under the eaves, barely tall enough to stand in. The bed was a straw pallet. There was no heat, but after the day she'd had, she collapsed onto it and was asleep in seconds. She woke before dawn to nausea so violent she barely made it to the chamber pot. The retching left her weak and shaking. She had to grip the wall to stand. There was no time to rest. Mrs. Caro expected her downstairs to help prepare breakfast for the boarders. Alara learned to cook through trial and error, burning her first batch of porridge, undersalting the second, finally getting it almost right on the 3rd attempt. The fishermen ate without complaint, too focused on getting food in their bellies before heading to the boats. One of them, a young man named Tom with kind eyes, paused on his way out. You doing all right, miss? You look a bit green. Fine, Alara managed. Just tired. Mrs. K works you hard, that's for sure, but she's fair. You'll settle in. She wanted to believe him. The days began to blur together. Wake before dawn, fight down nausea, prepare breakfast, clean rooms, do laundry, help with lunch, mend linens, assist with dinner, clean the kitchen, collapse into bed. Her hands developed calluses, then blisters under the calluses. Her back ached constantly. She lost weight despite the pregnancy, her clothes hanging looser. But she survived. 3 weeks in, Mrs. Caro found her vomiting behind the boarding house after breakfast. Alara looked up, wiping her mouth with a trembling hand, to find the older woman watching her with those sharp, knowing eyes. How far along? Mrs. Caro asked. No point lying. 3 months. Maybe a bit more. The husband who died. He know? No. Mrs. Caro was quiet for a long moment. Then, you'll start showing soon. The boarders will notice. I know. Some of them won't like it. Unwed mother, working in close quarters. I'm not unwed, Alara said quietly. I'm widowed. And I'm the Queen of England. Mrs. Caro's tone was dry. I don't care about your story, girl, but I need to know, you planning to keep this baby? The question hit like a slap. Alara pressed her hand to her stomach protectively. Yes. Then you'll need to work until you can't, save every copper, and hope you don't have complications. Mrs. Caro's voice softened slightly. Midwife here's good. Widow Crane, she'll help when the time comes, if you can pay her. How much? 2 silver for the birth, more if there's trouble. 2 silver. Alara was earning 4 copper a week. It would take months to save that much. And she'd have to stop working eventually, once the pregnancy became too obvious or too difficult. The math was impossible. I'll manage, she said anyway. Mrs. Caro snorted. You're stubborn, I'll give you that. Get back inside. Those breakfast dishes won't wash themselves. As spring turned to summer, Alara's body began to betray her. The nausea faded, but her stomach started to swell. She let out her dresses as much as she could, wore aprons to hide the growing bump, moved carefully to avoid drawing attention. Tom noticed first. She saw it in his eyes one morning when she reached up to take a pot from a high shelf and her dress pulled tight across her belly. He didn't say anything, just looked away quickly. But the next day he left an extra half loaf of bread from his breakfast. Wasn't hungry, he muttered. The small kindness made her want to cry. Not everyone was kind. One of the older fishermen, Garrett, made increasingly pointed comments about loose women and bastards. Mrs. Caro shut him down the first few times, but eventually even she seemed tired of defending Alara. Keep your head down and do your work, she advised. That's all you can do. Alara kept her head down. She also started planning. The baby would come in late autumn, best she could figure. She needed to save more money, find a place to stay after she left Mrs. Caro's, arrange for the midwife. Every problem seemed insurmountable, but she tackled them one at a time, the way she'd learned to tackle the endless laundry. In late July, everything changed. She was hanging linens to dry in the back garden when she heard horses in the street. Unusual, most people in Rothaven couldn't afford horses. She peered around the side of the building and froze. Two men on horseback, well-dressed, clearly not locals. They were talking to someone in the street, gesturing around, looking for someone. Alara's blood turned to ice. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but she didn't need to. She knew what this was. Cassian had sent people to find her. She backed away from the corner, her heart hammering. How had they tracked her here? She'd been so careful. Used a false name, paid in cash, kept to herself. The reference letter, the one she'd written for herself as Mara Thorne, claiming she'd worked at Stormgrave Manor. If they'd questioned the staff, if they'd shown the letter around, someone might have remembered the girl who'd left to marry a fisherman, might have mentioned the village. Stupid. She'd been so stupid. The men were still in the street, their horses moving slowly as they looked around. Alara ran inside, taking the back stairs to her attic room. She shoved her few possessions into her bag with shaking hands. She had maybe 8 silver total now, a fortune compared to when she'd arrived, but nowhere near enough. Mrs. Caro appeared in the doorway. What's going on? I have to leave. Alara didn't look up, just kept packing. Those men in the street, they looking for you? Yes. What did you do? Nothing. Alara's voice broke. I left. And he won't let me go. Mrs. Caro was quiet for a moment, then, there's a boat leaving for the northern settlements tonight. Fisherman named Cray owes me a favor. I can get you on it, but you'll have to hide until then. Alara looked up, stunned. Why would you help me? Because I was young once, and someone helped me when I needed it. Mrs. Caro's expression was hard. You'll work it off someday, when you're settled. But right now you need to disappear. Tears spilled down Alara's cheeks. Thank you. Save it, cellar, now. And don't make a sound, no matter what you hear. The cellar was dark and damp and smelled of fish and rot. Alara crouched between barrels of salted cod, her bag clutched to her chest, and listened to the sounds filtering down from above. Heavy footsteps, male voices, cultured and commanding, so different from the rough dialect of the fishermen. Seeking a young woman, dark hair, traveling alone. Mrs. Caro's voice, calm and unhelpful. Get plenty of those through here. You got a name? She may be using a false identity. We're authorized to search. Not without the magistrate's approval, you're not. This is my property. A tense silence. Then, we'll be back. More footsteps. The front door closing. Silence. Alara didn't move. She stayed frozen in the darkness, breathing as quietly as possible until Mrs. Caro called down, They're gone, but they'll be watching the roads. Alara climbed out of the cellar on shaking legs. The boat leaves at midnight. I'll take you to the docks myself. They won't be watching the water, not yet. At 11:30, wrapped in a borrowed cloak with the hood pulled low, Alara followed Mrs. Caro through the dark streets of Rothaven. They avoided the main roads, cutting through alleys and back gardens. The older woman moved with surprising speed and certainty. The docks were quiet, most boats already secured for the night. Mrs. Caro led her to a small fishing vessel that had seen better days. A grizzled man with a missing tooth looked up at their approach. This her? He asked Mrs. Caro. Yes. Cray, this is... Don't want to know her name, Cray interrupted. Don't want to know her story. Just want to know she can keep quiet and stay out of the way. She can, Mrs. Caro said firmly. Cray studied Alara in the dim moonlight. His eyes lingered on her stomach. She was nearly 5 months now, impossible to hide completely. You know what you're getting into, girl? The northern settlements, they're rough, harder than here. I know, Alara said, though she didn't, not really. Passage is 2 silver. Alara dug into her bag with numb fingers and produced the coins. Nearly a quarter of her savings, gone. Cray pocketed them and jerked his head toward the boat. Get below. We leave in 10 minutes. Mrs. Caro caught Alara's arm before she could climb aboard. You're stronger than you think, she said quietly. Don't forget that. I won't. Alara's voice was thick. Thank you for everything. Just don't die, girl. That's thanks enough. Alara climbed into the boat and descended into the hold, a cramped, reeking space filled with fishing equipment and net. She wedged herself between coils of rope and tried not to think about what would happen if Cassian's men found her now. Above, she heard Cray calling orders to his crew. Apparently there were others, though she couldn't see them. The boat rocked as men moved around on deck. Then came the sound of ropes being loosened, oars being fitted into locks. The boat began to move. Alara pressed her hand to her stomach, where the baby was starting to flutter and shift, quickening, she'd heard it called. A reminder that she wasn't just running for herself anymore. We're going to make it, she whispered. I promise you. We're going to make it. The boat slipped out of Rothaven Harbor and into the open sea, carrying Alara toward an unknown future. Behind them, on the docks, she didn't see the shadow detach from a warehouse wall, didn't see the man who'd been watching Mrs. Caro's boarding house all evening follow their departure with sharp eyes. Didn't see him turn and walk quickly back toward the inn where 2 well-dressed men waited for his report. The hunt wasn't over. It was just beginning. The northern settlements turned out to be less a settlement and more a collection of shacks clinging to a windswept coastline that looked like it was actively trying to kill anyone foolish enough to live there. Cray's boat arrived 3 days after leaving Rothaven, 3 days during which Alara had been violently seasick, soaked by freezing spray, and convinced she was going to die before ever reaching land. When they finally pulled into a rocky harbor that barely deserved the name, she stumbled onto the dock with shaking legs and vomited seawater and bile onto the weathered planks. Welcome to Graymore, Cray said without sympathy. He jerked his chin toward the cluster of buildings above the waterline. That's it, all of it. Alara straightened, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. The village, if it could be called that, consisted of maybe 20 structures scattered along the cliff face. Gray stone, gray wood, gray sky. Everything was gray. Where do people stay? She asked. Wherever they can. Cray was already turning back to his boat. Not my problem anymore. Passage is paid. He was gone before she could ask anything else. Alara stood on the dock, salt wind cutting through her cloak, and assessed her situation. She had roughly 6 silver left, no connections, no place to stay, and she was 5 months pregnant in a place that made Rothaven look cosmopolitan. She picked up her bag and started walking. The village had no inn, she discovered quickly. There was a trading post that also served as a tavern, a fish processing building that looked abandoned, and houses scattered up the hillside. Most people she passed ignored her completely. Those who did look gave her the same wary assessment she'd gotten in Rothaven. Stranger, not welcome, probably trouble. At the trading post, a man with a scar across his jaw and eyes like flint looked up from sorting through crates. Help you? His tone made it clear he'd rather not. I need a place to stay, Alara said. And work, if there is any. He looked her over, lingering on her stomach. No work here for someone in your condition, and no rooms to let. I can work. I've done. I said no. He turned back to his crates, dismissing her. Alara's hands clenched around her bag. She'd come too far, risked too much to be turned away now. Please, I can clean, cook, do laundry. I'll work for just food and shelter. Don't need help. Everyone needs help. The man's jaw tightened. For a moment she thought he might throw her out bodily. Then a voice came from the back room. Let her speak, Dane. An older woman emerged, tall and raw-boned, with iron-gray hair and a face that had seen hard weather. She studied Alara with shrewd eyes. You running from something? The woman asked. Alara was so tired of that question. Yes. Law or man? Man, the woman nodded slowly. The father? Husband. He looking for you? Alara thought of the men in Rothaven, the shadow on the dock she hadn't seen. Yes. He dangerous? That was a question Alara had never asked herself directly. Cassian had never raised a hand to her, had never threatened her physically, but power was its own kind of danger. He's a duke, she said quietly. He has resources. Influence. Dane barked a laugh. A duke, you hear that, Ma? We got ourselves a runaway duchess. The woman, his mother, apparently, didn't laugh. Duke's wife wouldn't last 2 days doing real work. I've been working, Alara said. Her voice came out sharper than intended. In Rothaven, at a boarding house. Laundry, cooking, cleaning. For 3 months. I can show you my hands. She held them out, calloused, scarred from lye burns, nails broken and dirty. The woman took Alara's hands and examined them like she was inspecting goods at market. Then she looked back up at Alara's face. What's your name? Mara. Mara Thorne. I'm Sina. This is my son Dane. We run the trading post and we own most of the buildings that aren't falling down. She released Alara's hands. I got a place you can stay. Old smokehouse out back. Hasn't been used in years, probably half full of spiders. You can clean it out, make it livable. In exchange, you work here. Sorting stock, keeping the store clean, whatever needs doing. I'll feed you 1 meal a day. No pay beyond that until after the baby comes and you're working full time. It was barely anything, but it was a chance. Thank you, Alara said. Don't thank me yet. You might not make it through winter. Sina turned toward the back. Come on, I'll show you the smokehouse. The smokehouse was worse than Sina had described. It was a stone shed, maybe 10 feet square, with a dirt floor, no windows, and enough cobwebs to upholster a mansion. The smell of ancient smoke and rot was overwhelming. Alara stood in the doorway, staring into the gloom, and felt something inside her crack. She'd left a manor with 50 rooms. She'd left silk sheets and a wardrobe full of gowns. She'd left a life where her greatest hardship was boredom. And now she was standing in a shed full of spiders, pregnant and alone, and so far from everything she'd known that she might as well be on a different continent. Can't do it? Sina asked from behind her. Alara wiped her eyes roughly. I can do it. Then get to work. I'll send Dane with a broom and some rags. The next week was a blur of brutal physical labor. Alara swept out decades of debris, scrubbed stone walls until her knuckles bled, hauled bucket after bucket of seawater to wash away the grime. Dane brought her an old straw mattress and a blanket that smelled like fish. Sina provided a tin bucket, a chipped water pitcher, and a stub of candle. The first night alone in the smokehouse, Alara lay on the mattress and stared at the stone ceiling, listening to the wind howl outside. She was so tired her bones ached. Her back throbbed. The baby was moving more now, little flutters and bumps that reminded her she wasn't alone, not really. We're going to be all right, she whispered into the darkness. It was becoming a mantra. We're going to be all right. She almost believed it. Work at the trading post was different from Mrs. Caro's boarding house. Less physically brutal, but requiring different skills. Signa taught her to track inventory, to recognize the quality of fish and furs that trappers brought in, to bargain hard but fair. Alara learned that the people of Greymore respected honesty and despised weakness. She learned to keep her expression neutral, to never flinch when men made crude comments about her condition, to work until the work was done without complaint. She learned to survive on almost nothing. Sina's 1 meal a day was usually fish stew or hard bread and cheese. Alara supplemented it by trading her labor, mending nets for a fisherman in exchange for extra bread, helping a trapper's wife with laundry in exchange for eggs. Every scrap mattered. Every copper she managed to squirrel away went into the bag hidden under her mattress. By late August, she'd almost convinced herself that she might actually make it. Then the boat arrived. It was a larger vessel than usually came to Greymore, a proper merchant ship, not a fishing boat. Alara was inside the trading post, reorganizing shelves of canned goods, when she heard Dane curse. What is it? Sina asked. Don't know. Ship's flying a private pennant. Looks expensive. Alara's stomach dropped. She moved to the window, peering out. The ship was anchoring offshore. A small boat was being lowered, carrying several men. Even from this distance, she could see their fine clothes, so out of place in Greymore. Mara, Sina's voice was sharp. That your husband? I don't know. Maybe his men. Alara's mind raced. There was nowhere to run. Greymore was at the end of the world, one road in, no road out, except back the way she'd come. The wilderness beyond the village was impassable, full of cliffs and freezing water. She was trapped. "How many know you're here?" Sina asked. "Just you and Dane. I've kept to myself otherwise." "Good. Get in the back room. Don't come out until I say." Alara didn't argue. She slipped into the storage room and pressed herself against the wall, heart hammering. Through the thin walls, she could hear the door opening, boots on the wooden floor. A cultured voice clipped with authority. "Good afternoon. We're seeking information about a young woman who may have arrived here recently. Dark hair, traveling alone, possibly using the name Mara Thorne." Sina's voice, flat and unimpressed. "Who's asking?" "Lord Harwick, on behalf of the Duke of Stormgrave. The woman in question is the Duke's wife. She's unwell. We're trying to bring her home for her own safety." Unwell. They were telling people she was mad. Of course they were. "Haven't seen anyone like that," Sina said. "You're certain? The Duke is offering a substantial reward for information leading to her recovery." A pause. Alara held her breath. How substantial a reward? Enough to tempt even someone like Signa? "Still haven't seen her," Sina said. "We don't get many outsiders here. A woman traveling alone would be noticed." "Perhaps we could speak with other residents. You could try. Most folks here don't talk much to strangers, especially strangers who come in waving money around and making demands." The man's tone hardened. "We're authorized to search. Not here, you're not." That was Dane, his voice dangerous. "This is private property. You want to search something? Get the magistrate's approval. Nearest one is 3 days south." Tense silence. Alara pressed her hand over her mouth to muffle her breathing. Finally, "We'll be checking other areas of the village. If you remember seeing this woman, you can find us at the ship." "Sure thing," Sina said. The door closed. Alara waited, counting her heartbeats. After what felt like hours, Sina called, "They're gone, for now." Alara emerged on shaking legs. "They're going to search the whole village. Let them. Most folks here won't talk to outsiders for any price. We look after our own." Sina's expression was grim. "But you can't stay in the smokehouse. Too obvious. They see a young woman living alone, pregnant. They'll put it together." "Then where—" "My house. Dane's old room. You'll stay there, out of sight, until they give up and leave." "Why?" Alara asked. "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." Sina was quiet for a moment. Then, "When I was younger than you, I ran from a man too. Made it here with nothing but the clothes on my back. Someone helped me then. Figure I owe it forward." She moved toward the door. "Come on. They might circle back." For 3 days, Alara hid in Sina's house while Cassian's men combed through Greymore. She listened to them questioning villagers, heard them offering money, heard them growing increasingly frustrated. True to Signa's word, nobody talked. The people of Greymore closed ranks against outsiders with a solidarity that was both heartwarming and terrifying. On the third night, Alara heard raised voices outside. She moved to the window, peering through the gap in the curtains. Lord Harwick, she recognized him now, a minor noble from court, was arguing with a group of fishermen near the dock. One of them, a huge man named Garrett, had Harwick by the front of his expensive coat. "You calling me a liar?" Garrett's voice carried across the water. "I'm saying someone here must have seen her. And we're saying we haven't. You deaf as well as stupid? This is obstruction. The Duke will hear." "The Duke can go to hell," Garrett said flatly. He shoved Harwick backward. The noble stumbled, caught himself, his hand moving to something at his belt. A knife glinted in the moonlight. "Garrett, no!" Sina's voice rang out. She'd appeared from somewhere, moving between the men. "He's not worth it. He's calling us liars in our own village. And you'll hang for killing a lord, which is exactly what they want." Sina turned to Harwick. "You and your men need to leave. Now, before this gets uglier." Harwick straightened his coat, his face pale with rage. "This isn't over." "Yeah, it is," Dane said, appearing with several other men. "Your ship leaves with the morning tide, or we make sure it doesn't leave at all. Understood?" For a moment, Alara thought there would be violence. Harwick looked like he wanted to argue, to push back, but he was outnumbered and far from any support. "The Duke will hear of this treatment," he said finally. "Great. Tell him we said hello." Garrett spat on the ground near Harwick's feet. The nobles retreated to their boat, rowing back to the ship with their pride in tatters. Alara watched them go, relief and dread warring in her chest. They'd leave, but they'd be back. Or they'd send others. Cassian wouldn't stop searching. The next morning, the ship sailed south, taking Harwick and his men with it. The village celebrated that night like they'd won a war. Someone brought out a bottle of ancient whiskey. A fire was lit on the beach. People who'd barely acknowledged Alara's existence clapped her on the shoulder, welcomed her like she was one of them. "You're Greymore now," Garrett said, half drunk and grinning. "That means you're under our protection. Any more fancy lords come looking, we'll send them packing too." Alara wanted to feel safe, wanted to believe that she'd found sanctuary. But she'd seen Harwick's face, she'd heard the promise in his words. This wasn't over. September brought storms that battered the coast with a fury Alara had never experienced. The waves reached heights that seemed impossible, crashing against the cliffs with sounds like artillery. The wind was strong enough to knock a grown man off his feet. Fishing boats stayed in harbor, and the village hunkered down to wait out the weather. Alara's pregnancy was becoming impossible to hide now. She was nearly 7 months, her belly swollen and obvious under even the loosest clothing. Moving was difficult, her back ached constantly. Her ankles swelled. She was tired all the time, but sleeping was uncomfortable no matter how she positioned herself. Sina had moved her to a better room, given her an actual bed with a real mattress. But comfort didn't make the fear go away. One night, during a particularly violent storm, Alara woke to pain sharp enough to make her gasp. She sat up, clutching her stomach, and felt wetness between her legs. No, too early. The baby wasn't due for at least 2 more months. She struggled out of bed, calling for Sina. The older woman appeared within minutes, took one look at Alara, and cursed. "How bad is the pain?" "It's—" Another contraction hit, doubling Alara over. "Bad." "Dane!" Sina's voice cut through the storm. "Get Widow Crane, now!" The midwife arrived soaked to the bone, carrying her bag of tools. She was younger than Alara expected, maybe 40, with steady hands and calm eyes. "Let's see what we're dealing with," Widow Crane said, guiding Alara back to the bed. The examination seemed to take forever. Finally, Widow Crane sat back. "You're in early labor. Could be the baby's coming now, could be your body's just practicing. But either way, you need to rest. Lie down. Try to stay calm." "Is the baby—" "Heartbeat's strong. But if this is real labor, the baby's too early. Best thing you can do is try to stop it." "How do I stop it?" Widow Crane's expression was grim. "You don't. Your body decides. You just have to wait." The next 12 hours were agony. Contractions came and went, sometimes regular, sometimes random. Alara couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, could barely think through the pain and fear. Sina stayed with her the whole time, bringing cool cloths for her forehead, helping her shift positions, murmuring reassurances that sounded hollow. By morning, the contractions had stopped. Alara lay in bed, exhausted and shaking, her hand on her belly where the baby moved sluggishly. "Is it over?" she whispered. "For now," Widow Crane said. "But you're not out of danger. Your body's unstable. The baby could come any time. You need to stop working, stop moving around, complete rest until your time comes." "I can't afford to stop working." "You can't afford not to." Widow Crane packed up her bag. "You go into full labor now. This baby won't survive. Maybe you won't either." The words hung in the air like a curse. After Widow Crane left, Sina sat down on the edge of the bed. "She's right. You need to rest." "I can't pay you if I'm not working." "Consider it a loan. You'll work it off later." "Sina—" "I lost a daughter once," Sina said quietly. "In childbirth. She was about your age, stubborn, like you. Thought she could work right up until the baby came. She was wrong." Her eyes were distant. "I'm not losing another girl, not if I can help it." Alara's throat tightened. "Thank you. Save your thanks. Just stay alive." The weeks that followed were a special kind of torture. Alara was confined to bed, forbidden from doing anything more strenuous than walking to the washroom. She listened to the sounds of the village outside, people working, living, existing while she was trapped in forced stillness. Her money ran out. She couldn't contribute, couldn't help, couldn't do anything but lie there and wait. The guilt was crushing. Dane brought her meals, gruff but not unkind. Sina checked on her multiple times a day. Widow Crane visited weekly to monitor her progress, and slowly, painfully, the pregnancy continued. October arrived with freezing rain and early darkness. Alara's due date was approaching. Late November, Widow Crane estimated. Every day that passed brought her closer to safety, closer to the possibility that this baby might actually survive. But it also brought her closer to the moment she'd have to face what came after. A newborn baby, no money, no real prospects. She'd saved the child from Cassian, but for what? A life of poverty in a village at the edge of the world? She tried not to think about it. On a gray afternoon in mid-October, Dane burst into her room without knocking. "They're back," he said. Alara's blood froze. "Who?" "The Duke's men. Different ones this time. 3 of them, heavily armed. They're asking questions again, offering more money." His jaw was tight. "One of them is asking specifically about pregnant women." Alara struggled to sit up. "They know I'm here." "Don't know that for sure. Could be fishing." "They know." She could feel it, the certainty settling in her bones. Somehow, Cassian had figured it out. Maybe someone had talked, or maybe he'd just narrowed down the possibilities. It didn't matter how. He'd found her. "What do you want to do?" Dane asked. Alara looked at him, this rough, stern man who'd shown her more loyalty than her own husband ever had. "I won't let you get hurt because of me." "Not what I asked." Before she could answer, Sina appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "Mara, they're saying the Duke himself is on the ship offshore. He's come personally." The room tilted. Cassian was here. Not his men, not hired investigators. Him. He'd crossed the entire kingdom, traveled to the edge of civilization to find her. "Why?" Alara whispered. "Why would he—" "Because you're carrying his heir," Sina said bluntly, "and because you made him look like a fool by running." Alara pressed her hands to her stomach where the baby kicked vigorously. So close. She'd come so close to escaping. "He wants to meet with you," Sina continued. "Sent a message. Says he'll come alone, unarmed, just wants to talk." "It's a trap." "Maybe. Maybe not." Sina's expression was unreadable. "But if you don't meet him, he'll tear this village apart looking for you, and people will get hurt." The choice crystallized with brutal clarity. Alara could hide, could let the people of Greymore fight her battle, could watch as Cassian used his power and money to destroy this place that had sheltered her. Or she could face him. "Where does he want to meet?" she asked. "The old lighthouse, north end of the village. He says sundown." Alara looked out the window at the gray sky. Sundown was maybe 2 hours away. "Tell him I'll be there." "Mara, it's time," Alara said. Her voice was steadier than she felt. "I can't keep running forever, and I won't let other people pay for my choices." Dane and Sina exchanged looks. Then Sina nodded slowly. "We'll be close by, watching. He tries anything." "I know." Alara pushed herself to her feet, wincing at the effort. "Help me get dressed. I'm not meeting my husband looking like this." The old lighthouse stood on a rocky outcrop at the northern edge of Greymore, abandoned for years after a storm had damaged the light mechanism beyond repair. Alara walked there slowly, her body heavy and awkward, Dane trailing 20 paces behind as a silent guard. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of blood and ash. Appropriate, somehow. She reached the lighthouse as the last light faded. The door was ajar. She pushed it open and stepped inside. Cassian stood in the center of the circular room, his back to her. He'd lost weight. She could see it in the line of his shoulders, the way his coat hung slightly loose. His hair needed cutting. When he turned, there were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there before. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Cassian said, "Hello, Alara." His voice was exactly the same. Controlled, measured, giving nothing away. "Your Grace," she said. He flinched at the title. "Don't, please." "Why not? That's what you are. What you've always been." "I know." He took a step toward her, stopped when she stiffened. "I'm not here to force you back. I need you to know that." "Then why are you here?" "Because I've spent 4 months searching for you. Because you disappeared in the middle of the night without explanation. Because you're carrying my child and you—" His voice cracked, actually cracked. "You could have been dead. I thought you were dead." Alara laughed, a harsh sound. "You thought I was dead, or you were worried your heir was dead?" "Both." At least he was honest. "At first, yes. I thought about the inheritance, the succession, all the practical concerns, but then—" He rubbed his hand over his face. "I read your letter, over and over. I cannot continue this arrangement. 10 words. That's all you gave me." What else was there to say? Everything, the word burst out of him. You could have told me you were unhappy. You could have. I told you every day, Elara said quietly. With every silence, every ignored dinner, every night you spent with Lady Isolde while I slept alone. I told you 1,000 times. You just weren't listening. Cassian looked like she'd slapped him. Isolde, that was never. We didn't. I don't care. And she realized she truly didn't. Whatever Cassian had or hadn't done with his mistress didn't matter anymore. I didn't leave because of her. I left because of you. Because after 3 years of marriage, you still couldn't see me. I see you now. Too late. Is it? He moved closer, close enough that she could see the desperation in his eyes. Elara, please, come back. Not to the old arrangement. I'll change everything. You'll have your own house, your own staff, complete independence. You can raise the child however you want. I'll... Stop. Elara held up her hand. You think this is about houses and staff? You think you can buy your way out of this? Then what do you want? The question hung between them. What did she want? She'd spent months running, surviving, building a new life from scraps. She'd learned to work with her hands, to bargain, to fight for every scrap of dignity. She'd found people who protected her without asking for anything in return. And now Cassian stood here, offering her back the gilded cage, wrapped in prettier paper. I want you to leave, she said. I want you to go back to Stormgrave and forget about me. I can't do that. Because of the heir. Because... He stopped, his jaw working. Yes, partly. The baby is mine. I have a right. You have nothing. Elara's voice turned to ice. You gave up any rights when you treated me like property for 3 years. This child is mine. Mine. And you don't get to take that away. I could. The words came out harsh. Legally, I could. The courts would rule in my favor. I could drag you back, take the child the moment it's born. Try it. Elara stepped forward, and something in her expression made Cassian take a step back. Try it, and I will fight you. I will make this so public, so ugly, that your precious reputation will never recover. I'll tell everyone how the Duke of Stormgrave hunted his pregnant wife across the kingdom like an animal. How he used his power to terrorize a woman who just wanted to be free. Elara, I survived in a boarding house. I survived a fishing village. I survived a boat journey that almost killed me, false labor that could have ended everything, and 4 months of living on almost nothing. Her voice shook, but not with fear, with fury. I survived you. Do you really think I won't survive whatever you throw at me next? Cassian stared at her like he was seeing a stranger. Maybe he was. What happened to you? He whispered. I stopped being invisible. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of wind howling around the lighthouse. Then Cassian did something Elara had never seen him do in 3 years of marriage. He sank to his knees. I'm sorry, he said. His voice was raw. I'm sorry for all of it. For not seeing you. For treating you like an obligation instead of a person. For making you so desperate that running into the wilderness seemed better than staying with me. He looked up at her, and there were tears on his face. I can't force you to come back. You're right. I could try, legally, but I won't. You deserve better than that. Elara's throat tightened. She'd imagined this moment 100 times, Cassian begging, apologizing, finally understanding. But now that it was happening, she felt nothing but exhaustion. Then what do you want from me? She asked. A chance. He stayed on his knees. Not now, not until after the baby's born. But someday. A chance to prove I can be different, that's all. And if I say no, bye, then I'll leave. I'll make sure you have money, protection, whatever you need, but I'll leave you alone. He swallowed hard. I swear it. Elara wanted to believe him. Part of her, the part that was tired of fighting, tired of struggling, wanted so badly to believe him, but she'd learned to be careful. I need to think, she said finally. How long? Until after the baby comes. I'll contact you then. Give you my answer. She wrapped her arms around her stomach protectively. That's the best I can offer. Cassian climbed slowly to his feet. That's more than I deserve. He moved toward the door, then paused. The people here, they protected you. They deserve to be rewarded, not punished. I know. I'll make sure the village receives funds. For a new lighthouse, better boats, whatever they need. No strings attached. Cassian, not a bribe, not a bargaining chip, just payment for keeping you safe when I failed to." He looked at her one more time. "I'll wait for your answer, Alara, however long it takes." Then he was gone, the door closing behind him. Alara stood alone in the lighthouse, her hand on her belly, feeling the baby kick and turn. Outside, she heard voices, Dane's, then Cassian's, a brief exchange. Then the sound of horses, fading into the distance. She walked to the door on shaking legs and stepped outside. Dane was there, waiting. "He gone?" Dane asked. "Yes." "For good?" Alara looked out at the ocean, dark and endless under the rising moon. Somewhere out there, Cassian's ship would be preparing to sail. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I don't know anything anymore." Dane grunted. "Come on, Cygna's got soup waiting." They walked back toward the village together, the lighthouse dark behind them. Alara had survived Cassian's pursuit. She'd faced him down and won her freedom. But as she felt her baby moving inside her, growing stronger every day, she realized the hardest part was still ahead. Because in 2 months, this child would be born. And then she'd have to decide what kind of future to build from the ashes of everything she'd left behind. November came with a vengeance, bringing storms that made October's weather look gentle. The wind screamed around Sina's house like something alive and furious. Alara spent her days listening to it, feeling the baby move inside her with increasing vigor, wondering if she'd made the right choice letting Cassian leave. She'd received a letter 3 weeks after their meeting at the lighthouse. It had arrived via courier, a young man who'd traveled from the capital with a sealed envelope and instructions to wait for a response. The letter was short. "Alara, true to my word, I've arranged for funds to be transferred to Greymore. Cygna has the details. The village council can decide how to use them. I'm back at Stormgrave, waiting. No pressure, no demands. Just the simple acknowledgement that he was keeping his promise." Alara had sent back an equally brief response. "Received. Will contact you after the birth." Now, lying in bed with her swollen belly making even breathing difficult, she wondered what she'd actually say when that time came. "Stop thinking so loud," Sina said from the doorway. She carried a tray with soup and bread. "You'll give yourself a headache on top of everything else." "I'm not thinking loud. You've been staring at that ceiling for an hour. That's thinking loud." Sina set the tray down. "Eat. Widow Crane says the baby's dropped. Could be any time now." Alara struggled to sit up, accepting the bowl. The soup was fish and potato, the same thing they'd eaten for weeks. Her kingdom for fresh vegetables. "Has the money come through?" "Yesterday. The village council met this morning." Sina's expression was complicated. "They're using some for a new boat. Rest is going toward winter supplies and repairs." "That's good." "It is, but people are asking questions. Why would a duke send money to a village in the middle of nowhere?" Sina sat on the edge of the bed. "I told them we helped one of his people, left it vague. But Mara, Alara, whatever you're called, you can't hide here forever." "I know. So what's your plan? After the baby comes?" That was the question, wasn't it? Alara had spent months running, surviving, fighting. She hadn't thought much beyond getting to this point alive. "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me wants to stay here, build a life in Greymore, raise the baby far away from Stormgrave and everything it represents." "And the other part?" Alara thought about Cassian on his knees, tears on his face. Thought about the power she'd walked away from, the ability to change things, to influence the world beyond this tiny village. The other part wonders if running was enough. If I shouldn't have stayed and fought for something better. You did fight. You're still fighting. But for what? So my child can grow up in poverty instead of privilege. Is that really better? Sina was quiet for a moment. Poverty's not the worst thing. I've lived in both worlds. I'll take honest poverty over poisonous wealth any day. She stood, picking up the tray. But that's not really what you're asking, is it? You're asking if you can trust him, if people can change. Can they? Some can, some can't. Only way to know is to test them. Sina moved toward the door. Get some rest. I have a feeling you'll need it soon. She was right. The contraction started that night, waking Alara from restless sleep. At first she thought it was more false labor, but these pains were different, deeper, more insistent, coming in waves that took her breath away. By dawn, she was in active labor. Widow Crane arrived with the sunrise, bringing her bag and a calm competence that Alara clung to like a lifeline. Cygna stayed close, holding Alara's hand through contractions, wiping sweat from her forehead, murmuring encouragement. You're doing good, Widow Crane said after an examination. Baby's positioned right. This should go smooth. Should. Alara had learned that should meant nothing when it came to childbirth. The hours blurred together, pain and pressure and the terrifying sensation of her body doing something completely beyond her control. She'd never felt so powerless, so utterly at the mercy of nature. I can't, she gasped during a particularly brutal contraction. I can't do this. Yes, you can, Sina said firmly. You've done harder things than this. Like what? You left a duke, you survived on your own. You built a whole new life from nothing. Sina's grip on her hand was almost painful. This is just one more thing you're going to survive. The contraction passed. Alara lay back, panting. What if something goes wrong? Then we deal with it, but you don't get to give up. Not now. Another contraction hit, stronger than before. Alara screamed, a raw animal sound she'd never made in her life. The Duchess she'd been would have been horrified. The woman she'd become didn't care. That's it, Widow Crane said. Good. Let it out. Time lost all meaning. There was only pain and effort and the overwhelming urge to push when Widow Crane finally said the words Alara had been waiting for. Next contraction, you push, hard as you can. Alara bore down with everything she had, feeling something shift and tear. She heard herself making sounds she didn't recognize, felt Sina's hand gripping hers, heard Widow Crane giving instructions in a steady voice. Again, one more push. Come on, girl, give me one more. Alara pushed with strength she didn't know she had, and suddenly there was a release, a rush of relief so intense she almost passed out. Then a cry, high and angry and absolutely perfect. It's a girl, Widow Crane announced. You have a daughter. Alara tried to sit up, but her body wouldn't cooperate. Is she? She's perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, good strong lungs. Widow Crane was doing something Alara couldn't see, cleaning the baby. Small, but healthy. Here. She placed a tiny, squirming bundle in Alara's arms. The baby was red-faced and furious, her little fists waving. She had a shock of dark hair and eyes that were screwed shut against the bright world. She was the most beautiful thing Alara had ever seen. Hello, Alara whispered. Her voice was wrecked from screaming. Hello, little one. The baby's crying settled into snuffling hiccups. One tiny hand wrapped around Alara's finger with surprising strength. She's got a grip, Sina said, her own voice thick. That's a good sign. Alara couldn't stop staring at her daughter, this tiny person she'd carried for 9 months, protected, run hundreds of miles to keep safe. She was real. She was here. She was alive. What are you going to name her? Widow Crane asked, working on delivering the afterbirth. Alara hadn't let herself think about names. It had felt like tempting fate, assuming she'd make it this far. But now, looking at this perfect little face, one name came immediately to mind. Varen, she said. It means truth. Sina nodded slowly. Good name, strong name. The baby, Varen, made a small sound, her mouth working. Widow Crane helped Alara get her position to nurse, and after some fumbling, Varen latched on. The sensation was strange and uncomfortable and somehow right. Alara felt tears streaming down her face, though she couldn't have said if they were from relief or exhaustion or overwhelming love. You did it, Sina said softly. Both of you made it. Alara looked up at the woman who'd become more of a mother to her than her own had ever been. Thank you for everything. Save your thanks. You've got the hard part ahead of you now. Harder than labor? Labor ends. Motherhood doesn't. The first weeks with Varen were a special kind of chaos. Alara had never been around babies, had no idea what she was doing. She learned by trial and error, how to change cloths, how to soothe crying, how to tell the difference between hungry cries and tired cries, and I just want to be held cries. She was exhausted constantly. Varen nursed every few hours around the clock, and Alara's body was still recovering from the birth. Some days she could barely get out of bed. Other days she felt almost human. Sina helped, showing her tricks and shortcuts. Dane, surprisingly, turned out to be good with babies. He'd hold Varen while Alara ate or bathed, talking to her in his gruff voice about fishing and weather patterns. The village women brought gifts, knitted blankets, carved toys, jars of preserved food. They didn't ask questions about Varen's father or Alara's past. They just accepted that she was one of them now, and the baby was Greymoor's child as much as Alara's. It was a kind of belonging Alara had never experienced. At Stormgrave, she'd been the Duchess. Respected but never truly included. Here, she was just Mara, the woman who worked at the trading post and had a baby and was doing her best. It felt like home. But as December arrived and Varen grew stronger, Alara knew she couldn't put off the decision much longer. She'd promised Cassian an answer after the birth. The letter she needed to write sat in her mind like a weight. What did she want? She thought about it while nursing Varen in the early morning darkness. Thought about it while walking the floor with a fussy baby at midnight. Thought about it while watching Varen sleep, her tiny face peaceful and perfect. The truth was, she wanted two impossible things. She wanted to stay in Greymore, where life was simple and hard but honest. And she wanted to go back to use the power and resources she'd run from to build something better. She couldn't have both. Or could she? The idea came to her slowly, piece by piece, over several sleepless nights. It was audacious, maybe impossible, but the more she thought about it, the more it felt right. On a cold morning in mid-December, she sat down to write 2 letters. The first was to Cassian. I have conditions. If you can meet them, we can discuss reconciliation. If not, I'll stay here and you'll honor your promise to leave me alone. First, I want legal independence. My own household, my own finances, my own staff. You don't get to control where I live or how I spend money. Second, I want a voice in decisions about our daughter, about the estate, about the political causes you support. Real input, not token consultation. Third, I want honesty. No more mistresses. No more pretending we're something we're not. If this marriage is going to exist, it exists on truth or not at all. Fourth, I want time. We don't go back to how things were. We start over, slowly, and only if we both choose it. You don't get automatic access to me or to Varen just because of a piece of paper. These are non-negotiable. Send your answer by spring. E. The second letter was to Mrs. Calloway, the housekeeper at Stormgrave. Alara had thought about her often, one of the few people at the manor who'd shown genuine kindness. Mrs. Calloway, I know my departure caused disruption. I'm sorry for that. But I needed you to know I'm safe, and I had a daughter. Her name is Varen. I'm considering coming back on very different terms. If I do, I'll need people I can trust. Would you be willing to serve as head of my household? I would pay you double your current salary, and you'd have complete authority over domestic matters. No obligation to answer. But I wanted to ask. Alara Vance. She sent both letters with the next courier who passed through. Then she waited. Cassian's response arrived in early January, delivered by the same young courier who'd brought his first letter. Alara opened it with shaking hands, Varen sleeping in a basket nearby. Alara. Yes, to all of it. I'll have my solicitor draw up legal documents giving you independent control of your finances and property. You'll have your own residence, either a house in the capital or a wing of Stormgrave completely separated from mine. Your choice. I've ended things with Isolde. Permanently. You were right. It was never anything real, and it was disrespectful to you regardless. As for time, take all you need. I'm not asking you to love me. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm only asking for the chance to prove I can be better. I want to meet Varen. When you're ready. But only when you're ready. Cassian. Alara read the letter 3 times, looking for manipulation, for hidden conditions. But it seemed straightforward, almost desperate in its simplicity. Mrs. Calloway's response came a week later. Your Grace, I'm honored by your offer and I accept. I always knew you were stronger than they gave you credit for. I'd be proud to serve in your household. Congratulations on your daughter. I look forward to meeting her. Margaret Calloway. Alara sat with both letters, Varen now awake and watching her with those dark, solemn eyes that seemed to take in everything. What do you think? She asked her daughter. Should we give him a chance? Varen made a small cooing sound. Yeah, that's what I thought too. She spent the next month preparing. She wrote to Cassian again, outlining exactly what she wanted. A house in the capital, not connected to Stormgrave. Close enough to interact with society, but separate enough to maintain independence. A staff of her choosing. A formal legal agreement that couldn't be revoked without her consent. Cassian agreed to everything. He also sent money, more than Alara had asked for. Enough to set up an entire household, to pay staff, to ensure she'd never be dependent on his goodwill again. Part of her wanted to refuse it on principle, but she'd learned that pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. This wasn't about ego, it was about security. She distributed some of the money in Greymore, making sure the village was set for years. Sina tried to refuse, but Elara was firm. You saved my life, she said, multiple times. This isn't charity, it's payment. You already worked for your keep. Not for this. Not for everything you did. Elara pressed the money into Sina's hands. Please, let me do this. Sina's eyes were bright. You're really leaving. Not forever. I'll come back, often. Elara looked around at the rough house that had become home. This is where Varen was born, where I learned who I could be. I won't forget that. See that you don't. In February, Cassian came to Greymore again. This time, Elara met him at Sina's house, Varen bundled in her arms. The baby was 3 months old now, alert and curious, her eyes following movement with increasing focus. Cassian stood in the doorway, and for a moment he just stared. At Elara, who'd gained back the weight she'd lost and then some, who stood straight and met his gaze without flinching. At the baby in her arms, so small and perfect. She's beautiful, he said finally. His voice was rough. Yes. Elara adjusted Varen so Cassian could see her better. She looks like you a bit. Around the eyes. May I? He stopped, swallowed hard. May I hold her? Elara hesitated. This was it. The moment she either trusted him or didn't. The moment she decided if this new arrangement had any chance of working. She stepped forward and carefully transferred Varen into Cassian's arms. He held the baby like she was made of glass, his entire body tense. Varen looked up at him with those solemn eyes, studying this strange new person. Hello, Varen, Cassian said softly. I'm your father. I know I haven't earned that title yet, but I'm going to try. Something in Elara's chest cracked open. She'd been braced for him to fail this test somehow, to hold Varen wrong, to seem uncomfortable, to treat her like a trophy instead of a person. But the way he looked at their daughter, the tenderness in his expression, it was real. Whatever else was broken between them, this was real. The house is ready, Cassian said, still looking at Varen. In the capital. Mrs. Calloway's been overseeing the setup. She's hired staff, prepared the nursery. Whenever you're ready to see it. I'm ready, Elara said. He looked up, surprised. You are? I've been ready. I was just waiting to make sure you were serious. I'm serious. About all of it. He carefully handed Varen back. I know I don't deserve another chance, but I'm grateful you're giving me one anyway. I'm not doing it for you, Elara said bluntly. I'm doing it for her. She deserves to know her father. She deserves to have every advantage, every opportunity. I can give her love and strength, but you can give her access to a world I can't reach on my own. I understand. Do you? Elara shifted Varen to her shoulder. Because this isn't about us playing house. This isn't about trying to recapture something that never existed in the first place. This is about building something new, something honest. And if you can't do that, I'll walk away again. I can do it. Cassian's voice was steady. I swear to you, I can do it. Then prove it. The house in the capital was beautiful. A 3-story townhouse in a fashionable district with large windows and a small garden in back. Mrs. Calloway met them at the door, her face breaking into a smile when she saw Elara. Your Grace, welcome home. Not Your Grace anymore, Elara said. Just Elara. As you wish. Mrs. Calloway's eyes moved to Varen. And this must be Miss Varen, may I? Elara handed over the baby, watching as Mrs. Calloway cooed over her with the practiced ease of someone who'd raised children of her own. The staff Mrs. Calloway had assembled were all women, some from Stormgrave who'd asked to transfer, others hired locally. Elara had been clear in her requirements. She wanted people who'd work for her, not for Cassian. People who understood loyalty to a person, not a title. The nursery was perfect, painted in soft greens and yellows, with a rocking chair by the window and shelves already filling with books. Elara's own chambers were elegant but comfortable, nothing like the ornate prison of Stormgrave. What do you think? Mrs. Calloway asked. It's perfect. Elara meant it. This was hers. Truly hers. Thank you. Over the following weeks, Elara began to build her new life. She hired a solicitor to ensure all the legal documents were properly filed. She started receiving callers, other women from society, some curious, some genuinely friendly. She navigated the social world with new confidence, no longer the scared girl trying to disappear. She was the woman who'd left a duke and survived. The woman who'd given birth in a fishing village and returned on her own terms. People whispered, of course, but Alara found she didn't care. Let them whisper. She knew who she was now. Cassian visited weekly, always by appointment, always respectful of her boundaries. He spent time with Varen, learning to change her, to hold her properly, to soothe her when she fussed. He was awkward at first, but he tried. That counted for something. He never asked to stay longer than agreed. Never pushed for more than Alara offered. He was, true to his word, proving himself. One evening in March, after Cassian had put Varen down for the night, she'd actually fallen asleep in his arms, a small miracle. He and Alara sat in the drawing room with tea. "There's something I need to tell you," Cassian said. "I've been working with some members of Parliament, proposing reforms to inheritance law." Alara raised an eyebrow. "What kind of reforms?" "Giving women more rights to their own property, making it harder for husbands to control their wives' finances without consent." He met her eyes. "I'm using what happened with us as an example, not publicly naming you, but making it clear that the current system is broken." Alara set down her teacup. "That's political suicide. Your peers will hate you for it." "Probably. But you were right. I had power, and I used it badly. The least I can do is try to make sure other men can't do the same." "This is actually happening? The reforms have a chance?" "Small one, but yes. I've got some allies. It'll take years, but—" He shrugged. "I have to try." Alara studied him. This man who'd been so blind to her suffering was now using his influence to try to prevent other women from experiencing the same. It wasn't redemption, but it was something. "I want to help," she said. Cassian looked surprised. "You do? I've lived it. I can speak to what it's actually like, what needs to change." She leaned forward. "Not publicly, not yet, but I can connect you with other women, help shape the proposals so they actually address real problems." "I'd like that." They talked for another hour, planning strategy, discussing possibilities. It felt different from any conversation they'd ever had. Collaborative instead of one-sided. Honest instead of performative. When Cassian left that night, he paused at the door. "Alara?" "Yes?" "Thank you for giving me this chance. I know I haven't earned forgiveness yet, but I'm grateful for the opportunity to try." After he left, Alara sat in the quiet drawing room, listening to Varen's soft breathing from the nursery upstairs. She wasn't sure if she'd ever love Cassian, wasn't sure if this arrangement would become a real marriage or would remain a practical partnership. But she'd done what she set out to do. She'd escaped. She'd survived. She'd built a new life on her own terms. And now she was using that hard-won strength to build something bigger than herself. The invisible Duchess had found her voice, and she was just getting started. Spring arrived in the capital with a burst of color that felt almost aggressive after the gray monotony of winter. Alara stood at her drawing room window, Varen balanced on her hip, watching cherry blossoms scatter across the garden like pink snow. "Pretty," Varen said. She was 8 months old now, babbling constantly, reaching for everything with sticky fingers. "Very pretty," Alara agreed, kissing her daughter's dark hair. Behind her, Mrs. Calloway cleared her throat. "Your Grace, Alara, Lady Pemberton is here for your meeting." Alara turned. "Already? I thought we had another hour." She arrived early, seems eager. Lady Pemberton was the 5th woman Alara had met with this month. All of them had heard rumors about the Duke of Stormgrave's estranged wife, who'd returned under mysterious circumstances. All of them were curious. Some were hostile. Others, like Lady Pemberton, were cautiously hopeful. "Send her in, and take Varen, please. I don't want her subjected to politics yet." Mrs. Calloway scooped up the baby with practiced ease. Varen went happily, already reaching for the housekeeper's cap. Lady Pemberton entered a moment later, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes and careful posture. Alara recognized that posture. She'd worn it herself for 3 years. "Your Grace," Lady Pemberton curtsied. "Please, just Alara, sit." They settled into chairs by the window. Alara poured tea from the service Mrs. Calloway had left. "Thank you for seeing me," Lady Pemberton said. "I wasn't sure you would." "Why wouldn't I?" "Because—" The woman hesitated. "There are stories about you. Some people say you abandoned your husband for a lover. Others say you went mad. The charitable ones think you were ill." "And what do you think?" Lady Pemberton met her eyes. "I think you ran, and I think you had good reason." Alara handed her a teacup. "What makes you say that?" Because I've thought about running, more times than I can count. Lady Pemberton's hands shook slightly as she accepted the cup. My husband controls everything. Every penny I spend, every person I see, every moment of my day. I asked for my own household account last year. He laughed. The familiar anger rose in Alara's chest. How long have you been married? 15 years. Children? 3. All boys. Which is fortunate, I suppose. He would have kept trying until he got sons. The bitterness in her voice was palpable. I heard about the reforms your husband is proposing, about women's property rights. Is it real? Yes, but it's going to be a fight. Most of Parliament thinks we're hysterical for even suggesting it. We? Alara smiled. I'm helping draft the language, making sure it actually addresses the problems women face, not just what men think we need. Lady Pemberton set down her teacup with a sharp click. I want to help. It could be dangerous for you. Your husband can do what? Lock me in my room? He already controls my life. At least this way I'd be doing something that matters. She leaned forward. Please, I need to do something. Over the next hour, they talked strategy. Lady Pemberton knew other women in similar situations, wives of lords and merchants and military officers, all trapped in various degrees of powerlessness. She could reach people Alara couldn't, navigate social circles that were still wary of the scandalous Duchess. When Lady Pemberton finally left, she looked different, straighter, less careful. Mrs. Calloway appeared with Varon, who'd fallen asleep in her arms. That went well? Better than well, we're building something, Margaret. Something that could actually change things. Or get you all branded as troublemakers. Probably that too. Alara took her sleeping daughter, cradling her close. But I'm done being quiet. Talk. The first public test came in May, at a ball hosted by Lady Ashford, one of the most influential women in society. Alara had been invited, which was itself significant. Many families still refused to acknowledge her existence. She dressed carefully, choosing a gown of deep blue silk that was elegant but not ostentatious. No jewels except her wedding ring, which she wore now not as a symbol of belonging to Cassian, but as a reminder of what she'd survived. Cassian was escorting her, per their agreement. They'd been seen together publicly several times now, always polite, always correct. The gossips couldn't decide if they were reconciling or maintaining appearances. Let them wonder. The carriage ride to the Ashford estate was quiet. Cassian had learned not to fill silences with empty chatter. When he did speak, it was usually about something substantive, the progress of the reforms, updates about Stormgrave's tenants, questions about Varon. Nervous? He asked as they approached the brightly lit mansion. Should I be? Lady Ashford's salons are where reputations are made and destroyed. Tonight will set the tone for how society treats you going forward. Alara smoothed her skirts. Then I'd better make an impression. The ballroom was already crowded when they arrived. Conversation didn't stop exactly, but it shifted. Eyes tracked their entrance. Whispers spread like ripples in a pond. Lady Ashford herself approached, a woman in her 60s with shrewd eyes and a smile that gave nothing away. Duke Stormgrave, how delightful. And this must be your wife. We've heard so much about you, my dear. I'm sure you have, Alara said evenly. Will you walk with me? I'd love to hear about your time in the north. Such an adventure. It wasn't really a request. Alara glanced at Cassian, who gave a slight nod. She took Lady Ashford's offered arm and let herself be led away. They strolled through the ballroom, Lady Ashford nodding to acquaintances but not stopping. Finally, she guided Alara onto a balcony overlooking the gardens. Let's dispense with pretense, Lady Ashford said. You ran away from your husband. You gave birth in some fishing village. You returned on your own terms with demands that would make most men apoplectic. True? More or less. And now you're working with your husband, the man you fled, to change inheritance laws that benefit women. That's either brilliantly strategic or completely mad. Can it be both? Lady Ashford laughed, a genuine sound. I like you. That's rare. Most young women bore me. She turned to face Alara directly. Here's what you need to understand. Half the women in that ballroom envy you for having the courage to leave. The other half are terrified of what you represent, the idea that marriage vows aren't sacred, that women can just abandon their duties. I didn't abandon my duties. I abandoned abuse. Was it abuse? He never hit you, from what I've heard. Alara's hands clenched on the balcony railing. There are other kinds of abuse. Being invisible. being ignored, being treated like property instead of a person. I'm not disagreeing with you, child. I'm telling you how they'll frame it. Lady Ashford's voice softened. You want to change things? You need allies. Women who've lived what you've lived, who understand why you ran. I'm finding them. Good. Find more. Because the men in Parliament will fight this tooth and nail. Your husband's support helps, but it won't be enough. You need a groundswell. Women from every level of society demanding change. How do I do that? Lady Ashford smiled. You start by telling your story, the real one, not the sanitized version the gossips are spreading. You make them understand what drove you to run and what brought you back. That's... Alara stopped. The idea was terrifying, exposing herself like that, making her private pain public. Terrifying, Lady Ashford finished. Yes, but necessary. Change requires courage. You've already shown you have it. Now you need to show everyone else. They returned to the ballroom. The night proceeded, dancing, conversation, the usual social maneuvering. But Alara's mind was racing. Tell her story. Make it public. Could she do that? Much thought. She discussed it with Cassian on the carriage ride home. It could backfire, he said carefully. People might see it as scandalous. Your family would be mortified. My family sold me to you for financial security. I'm not worried about mortifying them. Fair point. He was quiet for a moment. If you do this, I'll support you. But Alara, are you sure? Once it's public, you can't take it back. I know. She looked out the window at the dark streets. But Lady Ashford's right. If we want real change, people need to understand why it matters, and the only way to make them understand is to show them. Then do it. I'll make sure you have whatever platform you need. 2 weeks later, Alara stood in a crowded salon hosted by Lady Pemberton. The room was packed with women, nobles and merchants' wives, widows and young brides, even a few servants who'd been invited to listen. Alara had notes prepared, a careful speech about women's rights and legal reforms. She looked down at the papers in her hands and set them aside. I was 17 when I married the Duke of Stormgrave, she began. I didn't want to marry him. I didn't know him. But my family needed money, and he needed a wife who could produce heirs. So we made a transaction. The room was utterly silent. For 3 years, I lived in one of the most beautiful houses in the kingdom. I had servants, jewels, more money than I knew what to do with, and I was utterly miserable. She talked about the loneliness, the invisibility, the slow erosion of self that came from being valued only for one function. She talked about hearing Cassian dismiss her worth to his mistress, about discovering she was pregnant with no one to share it with, about the desperate calculation that led her to run. I left with almost nothing. I worked in a boarding house. I scrubbed laundry until my hands bled. I nearly lost my baby multiple times. I gave birth in a fishing village with a midwife and no guarantee either of us would survive. Her voice cracked. She didn't try to hide it. And you know what? I was happier in that fishing village, doing backbreaking work for pennies, than I ever was as a duchess. Because at least I was seen. At least I mattered. She talked about returning, about the conditions she'd set, about Cassian's choice to actually change. I'm not telling you this for sympathy, she said. I'm telling you because I know I'm not the only one. How many of you have thought about running? How many of you stay because you have no choice, no money, no way to survive on your own? Hands rose. Slowly at first, then more. More than half the room. That's why we're fighting for these reforms. Not because we hate men, not because we want to destroy marriage, but because we deserve to be people, not property. We deserve to have choices. When she finished, there was a moment of silence. Then one woman started clapping, then another. Soon the entire room was applauding, some women openly crying. Lady Pemberton approached afterward, her eyes wet. That was extraordinary. It was terrifying. The best things usually are. Over the following weeks, Alara's speech spread. Newspapers got hold of it, some praising her courage, others condemning her for speaking about private matters publicly. Political cartoons appeared, some vicious, some supportive, but women started coming forward, sharing their own stories, creating pressure on Parliament to actually consider the reforms. The backlash was fierce. Conservative lords called Alara a traitor to her class. Religious leaders condemned her for promoting disobedience. Even some women criticized her for being too radical. Alara weathered it all. She'd survived worse than words. The vote on the reforms came in July, during the hottest week of summer. Alara wasn't allowed in Parliament. Women weren't permitted. But Cassian had arranged for her to wait in an anteroom where he could bring her updates. She paced the small room, too anxious to sit. Lady Pemberton had come with her, equally nervous. "What if it fails?" Lady Pemberton asked. "Then we try again, and again, until it passes." "You really believe that?" "I have to." Hours passed. Alara fed Varen, who'd been brought by Mrs. Calloway, trying to focus on her daughter instead of the debate happening in the chamber beyond. Finally, as evening fell, Cassian appeared in the doorway. His face was unreadable. Alara's heart sank. It failed. No. A slow smile spread across his face. It passed. Narrowly, but it passed. Lady Pemberton burst into tears. Alara just stood there, Varen in her arms, unable to process it. It actually passed? First reading. It still has to go through 2 more votes, but Cassian moved into the room. It passed. Women will have legal right to their own property. Husbands can't control their wives' finances without consent. It's not everything we wanted, but it's a start. Alara sat down hard, her legs suddenly weak. They'd done it, actually done it. "There's something else," Cassian said. "The vote was close. What pushed it over was a speech from Lord Harwick." "Harwick? The man who'd hunted her to Greymore? Why would he support it?" "Because his daughter is in a situation similar to what yours was. He said your story made him realize he'd been failing her." Cassian's voice was soft. "You changed his mind. You changed a lot of minds." That night there was a celebration at Alara's townhouse. Women who'd supported the reforms, allies from Parliament, even some former skeptics who'd been convinced by the arguments. Alara moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations, but part of her felt detached. Was this real? Had they actually accomplished something? Cassian found her on the terrace, where she'd escaped for air. "You should be celebrating," he said. "I am. I just needed a moment." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city lights. Their relationship had evolved into something neither of them had expected. Not quite marriage, not quite partnership, but something functional and occasionally warm. "I've been thinking," Cassian said, "about what comes next." "Next?" "For us. We've been living separately, which was necessary, but Varen's getting older. She should know both her parents. Not as distant figures, but as—" He stopped. "I'm doing this badly." "Doing what badly?" "Asking if you'd consider living at Stormgrave again. Not in separate wings, together, as—" He took a breath. "As a real family." Alara turned to look at him. In the lamplight, she could see the uncertainty in his face, the hope he was trying not to show. "Cassian, I know I don't deserve it. I know I failed you in every way that mattered, but we've built something these past months. Trust, maybe. Respect. And I—" His voice cracked slightly. "I want to be more than just Varen's father. I want to be your partner. Actually, your partner." "Are you asking me to fall in love with you?" "No. I'm asking you to give me the chance to fall in love with you, the real you, the woman who survived everything I put her through and came back stronger." He met her eyes. "I don't know if you can ever love me, but I'd like to try to deserve it." Alara was quiet for a long time. She thought about the girl she'd been, desperate and invisible. She thought about the woman she'd become, scarred but stronger. She thought about what she wanted for Varen, a mother who'd chosen strength over safety, a father who'd learned to change. "I'll consider it," she said finally. "But slowly. We try living at Stormgrave for a few months, separate rooms at first. You keep proving you've changed, and if at any point I'm not happy, we go back to how things are now. Done. Anything you want. I want honesty, real honesty. No more pretending things are fine when they're not. You have it, and I want to keep working. The reforms are just the beginning. There's more to do." "I know. I'll support whatever you choose." Alara studied his face, looking for deception, for the control that had defined their early marriage. But all she saw was sincerity. Maybe people could change. Maybe not completely, not permanently, but enough. "All right," she said. "We'll try." They moved back to Stormgrave in August. It was strange walking through those familiar halls again, but Alara had changed them. The wing Cassian had given her was redecorated, warm instead of cold. She'd brought Mrs. Calloway and her trusted staff. She'd established rules and boundaries. It wasn't the prison it had been. It was something new. Varen thrived. She had both her parents now, Cassian teaching her to walk in the gardens, Elara reading to her before bed. The little girl had no idea she was witnessing something remarkable, a marriage being rebuilt from ashes. The reforms continued. The second and third readings passed, each by wider margins as public opinion shifted. Other proposals followed: education rights for women, protections against domestic violence, custody rights for mothers. Elara became a voice people listened to, not because she was a duchess, but because she'd lived what she was fighting for. On a cool evening in October, Elara found Cassian in his study, reviewing documents. She knocked on the doorframe. "Can we talk?" He looked up immediately, setting aside his work. "Of course." She entered, closing the door behind her. "I've been thinking about your question. From the summer." "About living as a real family?" "Yes." She sat across from him. "I want you to know, I don't hate you anymore. I did, for a while. But you've proven yourself. The changes you've made, the work you've put in, the way you are with Varen. It's real." "But?" He heard it in her tone. "But I'm not sure I can love you. Not the way you might want." Cassian was quiet for a moment. "That's fair. However," she leaned forward, "I think we could build something. Not a fairy tale. Not the grand passion people write about in novels. But a partnership. Respect. Maybe affection, eventually. That's more than I dared hope for. There's one more thing." Elara pulled out a folded document. "I want to renew our vows. Not the ones we took when I was 17 and powerless. New ones, where we both choose this equally." She handed him the paper. It was a contract she'd drafted with her solicitor, terms for their marriage going forward. Equal partnership, shared decisions about Varen, legal protections that couldn't be revoked. Cassian read through it carefully. When he looked up, there were tears in his eyes. "You're giving me another chance. We're giving each other a chance. I'm not the same person I was. Neither are you. These vows are for who we are now." "When?" "Whenever you're ready." He stood, moving around the desk. For a moment, Elara thought he might try to embrace her. Instead, he offered his hand. She took it. "I'm ready now," he said. They held the ceremony a month later. Not a grand society wedding, but a small gathering in Greymore. Sina and Dane were there, along with Widow Crane and other villagers who'd protected Elara. Mrs. Calloway came, and Lady Pemberton with several other women who'd joined the reform movement, and Varen, nearly a year old, who toddled between her parents, wearing a dress Sina had made. The vows were simple, honest, both of them promising to see each other, to listen, to choose this partnership every day. When Cassian kissed Elara at the end, it was soft, tentative, a beginning, not a culmination. "Thank you," he whispered. "Don't thank me yet. I'm going to make your life difficult. I'm counting on it." One. 2 years later, Elara stood before Parliament, invited to speak about the next set of proposed reforms. Women still couldn't vote, but they could witness. They could testify. They could make their voices heard. Varen sat in the gallery with Mrs. Calloway, too young to understand but present nonetheless. One day, Elara would tell her daughter about this moment, about how her mother had fought to change the world that tried to make her invisible. "My lords," Elara began, "I come before you not as the Duchess of Stormgrave, though that is my title. I come as someone who knows what it means to have no power, no choices, no voice." She laid out the case for custody reforms, for educational opportunities, for all the changes that still needed to happen. Some men rolled their eyes. Others listened. A few, including Cassian, sitting in the back, smiled with pride. When she finished, Lord Harwick himself stood. "The lady makes a compelling argument. I move we proceed to vote." The vote passed. Afterward, as Elara collected Varen from the gallery, Cassian found them. "You were magnificent," he said. "We were magnificent. This is both of ours." He reached for Varen, who went to him happily, babbling about something only she understood. Watching them together, her husband and daughter, Elara felt something warm in her chest. Not love exactly. Not yet. But the possibility of it. They walked out of Parliament together, a family built not on tradition or obligation, but on choice, on truth, on the hard work of becoming better. Outside, cherry blossoms were falling again, pink against the gray stone of the city. Elara caught one in her hand, showing it to Varen. Pretty, Varen declared. Yes, Elara agreed. It really is. She'd started as the Invisible Duchess, seen by no one, valued by no one. She'd run with nothing but desperation and hope. She'd survived poverty and labor and childbirth and the fear of being found. She'd returned on her own terms and changed the rules that had tried to break her. She wasn't a perfect ending. Her marriage wasn't a fairy tale. The reforms hadn't fixed everything, but she was seen, she was heard, she mattered. And she'd taught Varen, and countless other women, that they could do the same. The Invisible Duchess had become impossible to ignore, and that was everything.